we'll go ahead and get started. I hope everyone is doing well. We're taking the final lap here on this study. We've got a couple more weeks, so next week will be our last week. But obviously, you can see with the book Tactics, I mean, we could literally really take a deeper dive into this and really hone in, even too, just in your own lives as you're thinking creatively, how you might maybe go on and use this tool with somebody else. If you lead or would be open to leading a small group Bible study at your home, you could see how you could use this book. You could create different scenarios. You could split up into groups, allow people to kind of work through things. So a lot of opportunities for training here. You know, I think some of us are going to, be able to take exactly what we're learning and immediately apply it in certain situations. And some of us, may not have as much interaction. I remember years ago, even my wife just feeling like she was just kind of on the sideline because it felt like between filling sippy cups and changing diapers, it was like she never got to talk to anybody. And that may be the case, for some of us are in different situations. A lot of even what I do as a pastor, most of my interaction is with believers now, it feels like. So my opportunities with unbelievers are fewer and far between as well. We just want to take this time to be equipped and think through how we might use some of these tools. These are just suggested tools. None of us, I don't think, own stock in Tactics. We don't make any money off of this. It's just a potential tool to think through conversations with people. Let's go ahead and pick up with the study tonight. Last week, as a quick review, this is just something to really be cognizant of. And as we go into conversation, just realize that most people, even the smart ones, do not really think through their objections to Christianity. And it's our goal to really try to get them to consider the issues. A lot of times when you use the words most or very few, a lot of times, especially people who talk a lot, they tend to overstate things to prove it. But I don't actually think this is an overstatement. I think this is a pretty accurate statement that most people don't really think through their objections. They parrot what they've heard. We live in a culture where many people, that's exactly what they do. They take a clip from YouTube, they take a headline from their phones, news apps, what have you. They really don't think through their objections. They just parrot what they've heard. A lot of times when you talk to a lot of people, you can see that that's true because a lot of people will use the same kind of parroted response designed to shut down conversation or designed to shut you down in response. They use a lot of the same objections. One that we hear a lot when we as a church are involved in survey evangelism, the confrontational, intrusional evangelism that we utilize at different flea markets and county fairs. A lot of people will say something to the effect like, well, yeah, you can't trust the Bible because it was written by men, or something like that. So we hear that so much that one of the things that we tell our people to say is like, well, what? Or the Bible's full of contradictions. That's another one that comes up a lot. And we'll say, well, what specific contradiction concerns you the most in the Bible? And, to this day, I've asked that question, probably close to 100 times, and nobody's ever been able to produce one because they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just parroting what they think they've heard. So it's just important to understand that when you talk to people, most people have not really thought through why they're objecting to Christianity. One of the things the author says often is, he doesn't go into a conversation with the primary goal of converting somebody to Christianity, but rather with a primary goal of putting a pebble in their shoe. And I really hope that little phrase right there is a big takeaway from this entire series of Sunday night studies, because that concept right there is so freeing. And it also, I believe, is in line with divine thinking with people, because if you go around thinking you're someone's only shot to get saved, you're basically putting pressure on yourself that I don't believe the Lord would have you put on yourself. Your goal is to be part of the process in whatever way the Lord would see fit. And with some people, you might go through You might get to experience every stage in the process, especially somebody that you talk to often, where you're planted a seed, you're watering the seed, and then over time, as you've dealt with this person and conversed with them over time, eventually what you're saying is going to make sense regarding the gospel, and they're going to put their faith in Christ. And you may get to see every process along the way. And then there may be other conversations where you are only part of the process and you're not the harvester, and that's okay. We want to challenge people's thinking. We want to give them something to think about when they leave the conversation. Some kind of challenge, some kind of bump, if you will, bumping their thinking. This is what we're looking to do. And one of the big things with the methods that we're learning, these tools that we're learning in tactics, the author says never make a statement, at least at first, when a question will do the job. And for many of us, this is where we need to retrain ourselves, especially if you feel like this would be an effective way to converse with people, which I believe it is, actually. I feel like this is an area that I needed to be retrained in and constantly be reminded of, because the biggest tendency that we all have is when somebody challenges us or makes a challenging statement to our belief system, we want to go directly into lecture mode. We want to go into a monologue. We want to teach them something. We want to say something, rather than just being comfortable with the potential tension in the conversation and allowing somebody to say something that we disagree with, and then exploring their view with the goal of challenging their thinking, but doing that through questions. One of the big things the author says as well is he says, never take the burden of proof upon yourself. And we do this a lot. Somebody will make a statement like, well, I don't believe in God. Instead of flushing that out and keeping the burden of proof on them for the statement that they made, we take their statement, which has been given no proof. They haven't defended their statement at all. They haven't had to think through and provide a coherent and logical argument for that statement. And we take it right up and we start trying to prove that there is a God. And we've taken the burden of proof on ourselves. We've taken it off of them. We've taken them out of the hot seat, and we've willingly sat in the hot seat. That's one of I think, a great point that the author makes. And instead of grabbing the burden of proof and putting all the pressure on us, we want to accomplish our goal in a different way. We want to, through questions, we want to point out the flaws in that person's thinking, point out the flaws in the way that they even defend the statement that they had given. And so step one of the Columbo method, it really leads us in that direction. What do you mean by that? That's the question, or some variation of that. What do you mean by that? Something to the effect of, well, let me make sure I understand. What you are saying is X, Y, and Z. You're saying this. What do you mean by that? Or why do you think that way? That's actually more probably step two, but that's the concept is we're asking them now. They've made a statement. Maybe they've made a challenging statement to you. We keep the burden of proof on them by saying, what do you mean by that? It's one of those things. I love this methodology that he's describing in this book, because especially step one here, because sometimes we get put in tough situations. We flat out don't know what to say, where our mind is blank. But if we can remember this first step, it actually can buy us some time to think, buy us some time to pray, buy us some time to just maybe sort through where we'd like to take the conversation next. I also love what the author has done. We'll get to this later this evening. When you're flat out of ideas, you don't know what to say, the conversation's going to end awkwardly. He gives you some ideas on how to redeem the conversation, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Sometimes we get dumbfounded. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, none of us are going to be on every single conversation that we're in, but someone's got to defend their own statement. So we keep that in mind, and then we keep in mind this step one of the Columbo method. So that's what we looked at last week. This week, hopefully you were able to read through the rest of, I think he labels it part one and part two. Yeah, part one, the game plan. Hopefully you're able to read through the rest of that. I'm just going to be going over some of those things this evening. And one of those things was step 2 of the Colombo method. Okay, step 2 of the Colombo method is this. Now, not just what someone thinks, but why does someone think the way that they do? The second question in Colombo, remember the first question is, what do you mean by that? Second question, now how did you come to that conclusion? Or some variation of that. Why do you believe that? Or what got you to that point that you think this way? Right? And we think back to one of the examples he used earlier in the book. Your 15-year-old son stands up. You've got 3 or 4 couples over from church, and he just blurts out in the middle of dinner that he doesn't believe in God anymore, etc. And you're like, whoa, how would you handle that situation? Well, Colombo 1, what do you mean by that? What kind of God that do you not believe in, and how did you come to that conclusion, right? Those are 2 questions that you can almost universally apply in any situation where someone's challenging you or makes a difficult statement. Just a good model to put in our thinking, to remember, and again, to buy ourselves time, give us a chance to pray, give us a chance to turn our thinking to the Lord, and just allow the Lord to give us wisdom on how to proceed. But these will buy us some time. Remember, again, as the author often says, whoever makes the claim bears the burden of proof. Now, nobody can get away with just making a statement without having the burden of proof to prove it, to back up their claim, so to speak. And so just remember that in a conversation, when somebody makes a statement, they actually have the burden of proof to back up that statement, not you. And so many times, again, we don't ask questions. We go into a monologue lecture mindset when we're in difficult situations and conversations. We take the burden of proof off of their shoulders and we take it upon ourselves. Very important just to understand the mindset here, that what we're doing is they're making a claim, and now we're going to dig into that claim. We don't have to defend against their claim yet. We're trying to figure out if they can even defend their claim. This is the whole point of the questioning here. So it's not your duty or my duty to prove him or her wrong, but it's rather his or her responsibility to defend or to prove his or her view. The author made a statement in the book, if they tell the story, let them defend it. Right? If they're going to tell the story, let them defend it. So some variations of step 2 of the Colombo method, just to show that it's got some universality in terms of appeal and use. Why do you say that? What are your reasons for holding that view? What makes you think that is the right way to see it? I'm curious, why would that idea seem compelling to you? Years ago, I was a good friend of mine who had gone through training with New Tribes Mission. I guess it's Ethnos 360 now. He had actually gone through their Bible school and had talked a little bit about their missionary training. And one of the things that you do in missionary training is they teach you how to speak to tribal groups that don't have a biblical worldview. When you go into a tribal situation, just imagine speaking to somebody and saying God, and they have no concept of who God is, what He is, even what that is. That's not even a word that they use in their language. They don't have a concept. They've never seen the Bible. They don't know Abraham. They don't know anything. So where do you start with somebody like that? Well, oftentimes they start right here. What do you believe happens to somebody when they die? Well, we believe that there's a great spirit and there's smaller spirits, and we believe this, we believe that, we believe that. Oh, why do you guys believe that? My father told me, and his father told him, and his father told him, and okay, so it's come down by word of mouth. Well, how do you know that your father or your grandfather was right? And basically, this is the whole goal of discussing these things with these tribal people. It's to, in a sense, it's to put the burden of proof on them. It's to point out flaws in their thinking, and it's to point out that what they believe may not be true. They've always just accepted it because it's been their culture. They've had nothing else against it. So it's the same kind of concept here, in the sense of people often repeat things that they don't even know why they believe them. they've never thought through them. They just repeated it. It might be something their mom and dad said. It might be someone that their best friend said. It might be, if they've got a religious background, it might be something they've heard their pastor say. But they've never thought through it themselves. And so this step 2 of the Columbo method forces them to back up their claim or to back up their statement. Again, as we said earlier, you might be surprised to find out that most critics are not prepared to defend what they say they believe. I think I've got a little footnote in your notes, and if I don't either way, I'm going to read something from the book. And I love this. As you read these things, you're like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And some of us are like, man, I wish I could come up with that on my own. He says something like this: when caught off guard, some will quip, I do not have any reason, I just believe it. This is a remarkable admission. It is also a very foolish thing to say. In this situation, I always ask, why would you believe something when you have no reason to think it's true? Great question, right? If they're willing to say, I don't know why I believe it, I just believe it, then it's a great follow-up. Why would you believe something if you're not sure if it's true? Why would you believe it? Shouldn't you explore that a little bit further? Shouldn't you know why you believe what you believe, etc.? So these are all typical follow-up questions. Number 3 there, reject the impulse. And this is, again, talking about us trying to take the burden of proof back on ourselves, but reject the impulse to counter every assertion someone manufactures. Remember that alternate explanations are not necessarily a refutation. This is so important. In fact, I'm gonna read a little section in the book. It's on my page 62, but I think if you've got a newer version of the book, you're about 10 pages ahead of me. So probably somewhere like page 70, 71, 72, there's a section called How Did You Come to That Conclusion? And in that section, there's a quote by the Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins. If you can find that quote, or if you just want to listen along, this is a great example of an alternate explanation that's not a refutation. It's just an alternate explanation. And because he gives this alternate explanation, he bears the burden of proof, not us. This is what it says. Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins wrote a landmark work entitled The Blind Watchmaker. Notice the way he explains how flight might have evolved. How did wings get their start? Many animals leap from bough to bough and sometimes fall to the ground. Especially in a small animal, the whole body surface catches the air and assists the leap or breaks the fall by acting as a crude aerofoil. Any tendency to increase the ratio of surface area to weight would help. For example, flaps of skin growing out in the angles of joints. From here, there's a continuous series of gradations to gliding wings, and hence to flapping wings. Of course, this explanation may be a good one if you're a Darwinist. Stories like this are meant to parry objections, and this particular one has a good track record. This is partly because it sounds plausible enough at first. If it didn't, it wouldn't be appealing. And partly because it shields the Darwinian paradigm from a certain kind of criticism. Don't misunderstand me. Starting with the hypothetical explanation is not in itself the difficulty. Science, forensics, and normal day-to-day problem solving trade on this ability all the time. Imagining what might have taken place might be a legitimate first step. It is not the last one, though, because a story doesn't settle anything. More is required. In the case of flight, Dawkins' breezy account obscures 2 obstacles. First is the need for a massive infusion of new genetic information at just the right time and in just the right balance to accomplish the prodigious structural changes needed for flight. Second is the mechanical, sensory, psychomotor alterations required for the kind of flight that evolution could take advantage of. In order to overcome these serious hurdles, Dawkins needs to show the detailed and precise evolutionary pathways in specific cases of flights. Birds, for example, this he does not do. What might be a good response to that little story? Well, Professor Dawkins, you're saying this might be how it happened. Are you 100% sure this is how it happens? Because it seems to me that you'd need a lot of genetic activity at just the right time to make this happen. So what would be an alternative explanation besides this, since this is not very plausible? And see, there's ways to ask that question or respond. One of the things he puts in the book is when someone offers an alternate explanation, always consider the following. Is it possible? Is what they're saying possible, their alternate explanation? Is it plausible? Based upon the evidence, is it reasonable to think something like this could take place? And then third, is it probable? Is it the best explanation given all of the options? And so the person you're speaking to has to show you or convince you why his or her view is more likely than the one you are offering. Very important, again, to leave the burden of proof on their shoulder. I like this other story. I'm just going to read it through. It's on page 65 in my book. If you've got a newer book, it's probably 10 pages after that, 60, 75, 72, somewhere there. It starts with the professor's ploy. I don't know if you can find that section if you want to follow along, or you can just listen to me. This is very important and probably good for any college student or any young person that's going off to college to understand this particular section here, because it really fits into what this book Tactics is all about. He says, the professor's ploy, the Columbo tactic, is a good one to use in the classroom, but there is a pitfall. I call it the professor's ploy. Some professors are fond of taking pot shots at Christianity with remarks like, the Bible's just a bunch of fables, even if the topic of the class has nothing to do with the religious issues. Well-meaning believers sometimes take up the challenge and attempt a head-to-head duel with the professor. Don't make this mistake. It's right-hearted but wrong-headed. This approach rarely works because it violates a fundamental rule of engagement. Never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position. I love that sentence. An unwritten law of nature seems to govern exchanges like these. The man with the microphone wins. The professor always has a strategic advantage, and he knows it. It's foolish to get into a power struggle when you're outgunned. There's a better way. Don't disengage. Instead, use your tactics. Raise your hand and ask a question. For starters, you might ask, Professor, can you give us a little more detail on what you mean? What kind of fables are you talking about? Do you think nothing in the biblical documents has any historical value? Is everything in the book a fanciful invention of some sort? What's your opinion? Notice that these are all creative variations of our first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? Let the professor explain himself. As a good student, listen carefully to his response. Take notes. Ask further clarification questions if necessary. If he falters in any way, the other students will notice. If he has trouble making his ideas clear, it will become obvious that he has not thought carefully about his ideas. When you are satisfied that you have a clear take on his view, raise your hand again and ask him how he came to his conclusions. Ask him to explain the line of evidence that convinced him not to take the Bible seriously. Make the teacher, the one making the claim, shoulder the burden of proof for his own assertions. This allows you to stay engaged while deftly sidestepping the power struggle. Now, here's the pitfall I warned you about, the distractive ploy intended to derail your efforts. The professor may sense your maneuver and try to turn the tables. He might say something like, "Oh, you must be one of those fundamentalist Christians who thinks the Bible is the inspired Word of God." "Okay, I'm a fair man," he continues, looking at his watch. "We have a little extra time. Why don't you take a moment and prove to the rest of the class that the Bible is not filled with fables?" What has the professor just done? In one quick move, he has cleverly shifted the burden of proof back on you, the student. This is unfair because you have not made any claim. He is the one who is expressing a view, so it's up to him to defend it. He's the teacher after all. So don't take the bait. Falling into this trap is nearly always fatal. The professor is trying to get you to do his job. Don't let it happen. Instead, when you find yourself facing any form of the "why don't you try to prove me wrong" challenge, shift the burden back where it belongs, on the one who made the claim. Respond this way: "Professor, I actually haven't said anything about my own view, so you're just guessing right now. For all you know, I could be on your side. More to the point, my own view is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter what I believe. Your ideas are on the table, not mine. I'm just a student trying to learn. I'm asking for clarification and wondering if you have good reasons. That's all." If he gives his answer, thank him for explaining himself and either ask another question or let it go for the time being. You have done the best you can under the circumstances. circumstances. The professor's ploy is to shift the burden of proof from himself to someone else. He demands that others defend views they have not expressed, even though he is the one who has made specific claims. He tries to sidestep his responsibility, but the burden of proof is still his. Do not be afraid to question your professors. Challenge them on your terms, though, not theirs. And do it with grace, respect, and tact. Remember, you don't have to be the expert on every subject. If you keep the burden of proof on the other side when the other person is making the claim, it takes the pressure off you, but still allows you to direct the conversation. So just a real strong piece of advice there, and just remembering, I think, the basics and fundamentals of disagreements and of arguments or situations where people are trying to deflect their responsibility, where they make a claim and they don't want to flesh out that claim or describe why they believe it. Maybe because they don't have reasons for believing it, and so they try to shift the burden of proof to somebody else. And so just a great response there. Now, what happens if you're in a situation and you're literally sweating bullets and you don't know how to get out of it? You have come up with somebody that on this day is just more equipped and more thought through than you are on this topic, and you feel like you are under attack and barrage and you just don't know how to get out. This is a great little section on the book. I think it's on page 90 in the newer books. I think that's what I had heard from my mom. I think it's on page 90. It's on page 68 in the older book. It's called Getting Out of the Hot Seat. I think great advice, very humble response, but if you feel completely overmatched, let the person beat up on you, but have them do it slowly and clearly so that you can take it all in and even write it down if you are able. Now, that seems like the exact opposite of what you should do, but I think this is a very humble approach. I mean, clearly you're not ready for this conversation. Clearly your mind's not working. The points they're making seem to just be, you're sweating more and more. If they're going to beat up on you and they're going to give you kind of an intellectual licking here, so to speak, take it down. Just take it down. Write it down. Take it all in. In fact, the author encourages to say something to the effect of, you seem to know a lot more about this than I do. So I wondered if you would carefully explain your view and the reasons why you believe them to help me understand better. The idea is you let them give you their best shot. You write it down and you take it in. Sometimes maybe even taking that posture can free us up to start thinking a little bit better. Sometimes when we're on the hot seat, it's just really hard to think and your mind goes blank. Even something like this where you start to listen for a little bit, you take this humble posture, your mind might start working again. You might have some questions you can kind of dig out of. But let's say you don't. You then end the conversation with something like, thank you. Let me think about what you said. Maybe we can talk more later. Especially if this is somebody that's in your day-to-day life that you might have more interactions with. It's totally fine to show humility. You don't have to be, the Bible answer man or the Bible answer woman on every issue. You can take it in. Take in their beliefs, write it down, and say, let me think about it. Maybe we can talk more later. And then when the pressure is off, when you go home that evening and you have time, do your homework, research the issue, and then come back better prepared to discuss it, starting again with questions. That's the other thing. I think that's a great point there. Don't come back and say, well, I listened to you, yesterday. You sit down and I'm going to tell you what's going on now. It's like, you're going to take what they've said and you're going to now ask questions to point out flaws in their thinking or make them defend. And sometimes that happens too. I think we get so nervous, we get on the hot seat, our mind goes blank, and then we realize later, like, they made 3 or 4 or 5 statements here that I never made them defend, that I never made them give me a reason for why they believe what they believe. You realize that as you go home, as you research and you got to get prepared for that next conversation. That right there is just a great tool for any one of us, because we are all going to face situations where we just feel overmatched. And It may not even be like normally you would be overmatched, but maybe something's going on in your life. You're just not mentally ready for it. Maybe there's lots of things like that in life where we're just not on our A game mentally. We're just overwhelmed with life. We've got something going on in our family. We're tired. We're not getting sleep. Our mind's just not working well. And it's better just to take a position of humility like this, take it in, and then when you're able to think through it and be prepared, you go back to that person and start asking questions. I like this. This is a good tool for normal human beings that aren't on their A game every day. And I appreciate the fact that he put this in the book. One of the things too in the book, and I think this is on page 99 in the newer books, it's on page 77 in the older books, but it's called Turning the Tables, especially when you're under attack. How do you turn the tables? Well, one way is to preface the conversation well. So when someone asks you for your personal views about a controversial issue, preface your remarks with a question that sets the stage in your favor for your response. Now, are there any controversial issues in our day and age? Yes. I mean, I can think about 5 of them right now, right? How do you feel about Black Lives Matter? Well, in some places in the South, you'd probably feel very comfortable answering that question regardless of who asked you. But if you went some places in the North or you went certain places in the South, you'd have to be very careful with how you might answer that question. You have to be very strategic. How do you feel about Trump building a wall? I mean, a lot of the political issues come in here. Some people will say, well, do you believe that if I don't believe like you, that I'm going to hell? Do you believe that everyone that doesn't believe like you is going to hell? These are very controversial questions and issues, so you might preface your remarks with this. And I think this is just kind of a wise way to get the conversation going and answer this question. You could say, this is actually a very personal question you're asking. I do not mind answering, but before I do, I want to know if it's safe to offer my views. So let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person or an intolerant person on issues like this? Is it safe to give my opinion, or are you going to judge me for my point of view? Do you respect diverse points of view, or do you condemn others for convictions that differ from your own? Those are all variations of the same question. But I love that because really what you do is you take all the ammo out of their guns. If they're just asking that question to set you up, to blow you up, you've just taken all the ammo out of their guns. I like this question. I like the idea of prefacing your answer with this question. Hey, I don't mind answering. This is a very controversial view, but before I do, I want to know if it's safe to offer my views. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person or intolerant person on issues like this? Is it safe for me? So these are good questions. And so now when you share your point of view, it's going to be difficult for anybody to call you intolerant or judgmental without them looking guilty too. Just a great way to preface your answer if you're trying to answer a question that is controversial, that's a hot button topic for somebody. What happens if you've already been labeled intolerant by someone? Go to Columbo question number 1. What do you mean by that? What do you mean intolerant? When you call me intolerant, what do you mean by that? They're making a statement, right? You're intolerant. And basically you are making them tell you or give reasons why they've made that statement. You're not taking the burden of proof to prove their statement false. You're forcing them to prove that their statement is true. So you're saying, what do you mean by that? What do you mean intolerant? And they might say something like this because you think you're right and everyone else is wrong. Then you could say, well, what about you? You seem to be disagreeing with me. Do you think that your own views are right? They will answer yes. And then you can say, well, that's what confuses me. When I think I'm right, you label me as intolerant, but when you think you are right, then that's okay. And you might follow it. Can you explain to me why it's different when you do it than when I do it? I like that word confuses, especially in a heated type of debate, because it's a soft way of saying you're a hypocrite, right? You're basically saying it without saying it. It's like, well, something you said confused me. If it's not okay for me to do it, why would it be okay for you to do it? That's confusing to me. Can you explain that, why that's the case? Those are just kind of a soft transitional way. We're going to kind of get into that a little bit more here. So the quickest way to deal with an attack is to point it out with a question. I'm confused. Even if you are right about my character, could you explain to me what that has to do with the issue we are discussing? I really think that if some of the politicians got a hold of this book, Tactics, they would do so much better, because this is exactly what happens in political debate, doesn't it? It never stays on the issue. It always goes to an ad hominem or a character attack. It's not, hey, do we need good security at the border, regardless of what you think that is, if it's a wall, if it's drones, if it's more border patrol, or you think it should be open border for certain people. That's really the issue. The issue is not whether or not you're a racist. That's just not an issue. That's a character attack. And that's just one example, but you can use so many other examples. It's real easy to see in the political realm. People do this too in Christianity. Well, you're saying if I don't agree with you, then I'm going to go to hell? That's super judgmental of you. Who made you God? You could say, well, I'm confused. I never claimed to be God. I just claimed to communicate that this is what the Bible taught. So, even if you're right about my character, if I'm a narcissist and I'm a judgmental jerk, how would you deal with what the scriptures say? Bring them back to the issue that you were discussing. That word, sometimes I'm confused, or that confuses me. Maybe you can help me understand what you're saying. Those are great ways to diffuse when you're under attack, turning the tables on somebody. I just wanted to give you some examples, but this is so great to learn some of these transition questions. I've got really 3 transition questions, but I've got lots of different variations coming out of that. So these transition questions are great to really hone in and memorize, if you will. The first one, would it surprise you to know? Would it surprise you to know? Would it surprise you to know that that phrase is never used in the Bible? That's always a shocking statement. I remember the first time that I personally realized that asking Jesus into your heart was not in the Bible. The phrase is never found, the concept's never found. But I know that asking this question, would it surprise you to know that phrase is never used in the Bible? For some people that's going to be shocking. I think for a lot of people who grew up using that phrase, hearing that phrase, that's going to be shocking, because why? Well, they think it is in the Bible. They think that's why it's used. They've never stopped to think or to look for whether or not it's actually taught there. They just have heard it. It's a real soft, gracious way to say that's not even in the Bible. It's just a soft, gracious way, because the goal is never to embarrass anybody or make anybody feel bad. That's not the goal. Our goal is to get to the truth. Our goal is to communicate truth. We feel like, obviously, if people understand the gospel clearly and understand the response as being faith alone and the finished work of Christ alone, we feel like that's going to be of benefit, not only to whether or not they're even saved, but even how they go on living the Christian life. That's going to clear up a lot of issues for a lot of people, just that clarity and understanding there. It's a great question. Would it surprise you to know that phrase is never used in the Bible? I get into a conversation a lot at the fair, especially in the South, although I don't think it's just a South thing. I think it's pretty prevalent down here, though. At least it has been in Texas and in Georgia. My experience so far is a lot of people think that you're saved by asking for forgiveness. And I would just say, would it surprise you to know that the Bible actually doesn't teach that? And people's mouths drop, because they say, of course the Bible teaches that. It's on every other page. And it's like, it's actually not. Because when you think about how one receives forgiveness, how does an unbeliever receive forgiveness from God? Well, when they put their faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ, they receive forgiveness. But they don't receive it by asking for it. They receive it by putting their faith in Jesus Christ. How does a believer who's already saved, when they sin in their daily Christian life, how do they receive forgiveness of sin or restoration to fellowship? It's not through asking for forgiveness. It's through confession of sin. It's through It's naming the sin. It's saying the same thing. It's agreeing with God that what they had done is sin. And that's 1 John 1:9. Never are you told to ask for forgiveness. This is a great way to broach that question. Would it surprise you to know that the Bible actually does not teach that? Now, the Bible teaches you can have forgiveness of sins, but it's not through asking it. Can I show you what the Bible says about that? And so that's a great transition to the gospel. Again, would it surprise you to know that Jesus never said that? Would it surprise you to know that Jesus might disagree with what you just said? These are all just variations of this. Would it surprise you to know? Another great question that has a lot of variations. Have you considered? Have you considered? And sometimes before I say this, I'll say, I've actually heard a lot of people say that before, but have you ever considered? Or, you know what? A lot of people say that, but would it surprise you to know that? And then you go on with your variation. Have you ever considered that if the Bible were merely written by men, it would be very hard to account for fulfilled prophecy? How would you explain that? They say that Nostradamus made over 900 predictions, and because some of them are so generically worded, they think a handful of them have come true. Well, some people view the Bible just like they view Nostradamus. They think, well, it's just kind of generically, but the Bible is much more specific, and all of the Bible's prophecy has either come true or will come true in the future based on what we know in history. And this is one of those, well, have you ever considered that if the Bible were merely written by men, how would all of this fulfilled prophecy be true? Have you ever considered that the existence of evil is actually evidence for the existence of God, not against it? Have you ever considered that if partial birth abortion is okay, it's going to be hard to condemn infanticide, since the baby's location partially out of the womb in partial birth abortion or completely out of the womb, infanticide, is the only difference between the two? Doesn't location seem irrelevant to the baby's value? Have you ever considered that if Jesus was wrong about being the only way of salvation, it would be difficult to call him a good man, a prophet, or a wise religious teacher? What do you think about this problem? I think Josh McDowell came up with liar, lunatic, or Lord. Right? He had to be one of the three. He can't be a good man and claim to be God. People that are good people that claim to be God in our day, they end up in an insane asylum, right? We think they're crazy. Or somebody that claimed to be God but knew that he wasn't God, he's a liar, right? He's manipulating people. These are variations. Have you ever considered this or that? Another great question. Can you clear this up for me? Or can you help me understand this? Can you clear this up for me? If Jesus' divinity was an invention of the church in the early 4th century, how do you explain all the references to a divine Christ in literature written before that time? One of the things, again, in personal conversations regarding the gospel is I'll have people tell me that they're 100% sure that they're going to heaven, and I'll ask why, and it's because they keep the 10 Commandments and they do a bunch of good works. And I'll just say, well, maybe you can clear this up for me. Something you said confused me. How could you be 100% sure that you're going to heaven when a small percentage of your salvation is based upon what you will do or not do in the future? In other words, how do you know what you're going to do 5 years from now, let alone 5 minutes from now? Can you see the future? So if you don't know that, but it's still dependent on you, how could you ever be 100% sure? I remember talking to a girl one time, and she told me she went to church, she was a Christian, and I said, oh yeah, what does your church teach, or what do you believe it takes to go to heaven? And she said, well, I believe, you've got to be baptized, I believe you got to do this, you got to do that. She named 3 or 4 things, and I said, so based on what you're saying, you don't think anybody could be sure that they're going to heaven before they die, do you? And she's like, yeah, I guess nobody really could. And it led again to one of my favorite transition questions is, if I could show you from the Bible how you could be 100% sure, is that something you'd be open to seeing or be interested in seeing? And it led to an opportunity to share the gospel. But again, it was kind of a variation of, could you clear this up for me? Could you clear this up for me? Help me understand this. If homosexuality is truly natural, Then why did nature give homosexual men bodies designed for reproductive sex with women and then give them desires for sex with men? Why would nature give desires for one type of sex but a body for another? And you can kind of see the questions there are more generic. It's assuming probably that you're talking to somebody that's an atheist, because it says, why would nature instead of God? So I just kind of point that out in the questions. This is a great question. If we allow or condone any kind of sexual preference as what is natural or what you're born with, on what moral standard could we reject pedophilia or bestiality? At some level, even the most immoral person would tell you that pedophilia is wrong and that bestiality is wrong, but they're really not maintaining a consistent moral standard there. They're saying, well, if you're born this way, it's okay because you're born this way. But if you're born this way with these preferences, then that's not okay. And they're the ones with the contradiction in their viewpoint. It just gives us an opportunity to point out the flaw in their thinking. Here are some good transitions to provide answers. These are good transition questions to flush out what they believe a little bit more, to transition us to be able to start talking now. And here's some good transitions once these questions are asked and answered. I kind of gave you a variation of that. Well, if I could show you from the Bible how you can be 100% sure, is that something you'd be open to seeing? Once I pointed out a flaw in this young girl's thinking, that she allowed me to go on and share the gospel. So here's some good transitions. Would you consider an alternative? Or would you be willing to look at another angle? Let me suggest an alternative, and then you tell me if you think it's an improvement. If not, you can tell me why you think your option is still better. Right? These are all those transitions to saying something. Letter C. I would not characterize it that way. Here's what I think may be a better or more accurate way to look at it. Tell me what you think, and then go on and tell them what you're going to tell them. Letter D. I do not think that's going to work. I'd like to suggest why. Is that okay with you? I'm not sure I agree with the way you put it. Think about this. Think about it this way. And then you go on to explain. So again, those are just transitions to getting to say something that you would like to say. Now, how do you perfect the Columbo method? Well, practice, practice, practice. And let's talk about this. So how do you prepare for and perfect the Columbo method? Well, first thing you do is you anticipate beforehand what questions might come up. A lot of times we can do that. We can just anticipate because we live in the culture. We understand what somebody might object or how somebody might object. So we can kind of think through those and be prepared for what we would consider objections that might come up or questions. Then what you're going to do is you're going to reflect afterward on what took place. And then in both cases, you can practice the responses you think of during these reflective moments so that you will be prepared for the next opportunity. Just remember, every opportunity that you engage in, it's not about winning the argument necessarily. It's about putting a pebble in their shoe, and then it's about reflecting later on how you can improve for the next conversation. You're always learning. We're always growing in our ability to interact with people and get them to see the flaw in their thinking. And the book recommends finding a friend who's also interested in this, and that way you guys can practice with one another. You can talk through things. You can hear how they handled a situation or how they might have handled a situation that you were in. I'm going to show you a video. It's a real quick YouTube video, but it goes with one of the things that the author always anticipates in terms of conversations with people. In fact, if he talks to somebody that's an animal rights activist, we saw this with the witch in the first chapter, the witch in Wisconsin. If he is talking to someone that's an animal rights activist or somebody who promotes life, that tries to protect life of any kind, he always goes to the abortion issue, because the answer to their question on abortion is a measure of their intellectual integrity. He can use that to point out flaws in their thinking. So check out this video. It's interesting. He'll explain it well. Here you go.
What's up, guys? This is Will Witt with PragerU. Today we're in Echo Park, where we have a petition to stop the killing of eagles, stop the destruction of eagle eggs. But then we're asking them to sign a petition to stop the killing of babies. See how it goes. We have a petition to stop the killing of eagles, like eagle eggs. People disturb them or they destroy them. These eagles haven't been born yet, like they have rights, everything. Yeah. Like we don't think that they should be harmed, or there should be harsher penalties for those kind of things. Would you guys agree?
Huh? Yeah, sure.
Awesome. If you guys agree, we have a pen right here.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
Don't kill eagles.
Yeah, don't kill eagles, right? Eagles have rights too. So here's a pen.
Eagles are people too.
Yeah, eagles are people too.
Sign printed name. I signed it.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, double signature is fine.
I had like 3 White Claws today. Oh my god, how fun!
Perfect. All right, now you sign it. And so I didn't know if you guys would want to sign for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Best of luck. I hope you save the eagles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let me just talk to you real quick. We have one other petition about stopping the killing of humans too.
Oh my god.
Like babies. Stop the killing of babies.
I hate killing of babies.
Right? Like you hate abortion? We want to protect their rights too, even though being like unborn.
Wait, so I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
No, I'm pro-abortion. Sorry.
Oh, fair enough. Why do you?
Is this awkward now? Oh no, I don't agree.
You don't agree?
I fully support abortion.
Why do you support not the killing of unborn eagles, but the killing of unborn children?
I think it's the mother's decision.
I feel like anyone can make their own decision about their body.
I think because there's specific, rape isn't considered when you're talking, eagles aren't raped.
I think that's true.
A human woman should have more rights, probably, than a bald eagle. Yeah.
Okay.
Abortion.
Thanks.
But babies are gross.
You say babies are gross?
Yes. Well, it's just what it does to your body? You're not a woman, so you'd have no idea. There's precautions against that.
There are.
Yeah, 2019. Take birth control. Use condoms. Yeah.
A lot of things get overlooked when we're talking about people because we have consciousness.
Yeah, fair enough. Do eagles have consciousness?
I don't know. I've never talked to an eagle.
That's fair.
I don't think eagles have a lot of opinions.
I don't think so either. That's okay. All right, guys, we just finished up here, and we found that a lot of the people who we talked to at the beginning of our interview with them didn't really like us at the end of our interview. What's up, guys?
All right. So, kind of an interesting video, isn't it? It's just, that's actually really tragic. But I think he could have interviewed hundreds of other people, and it would have been the same exact thing. The lack of connection there, basically a faulty, hypocritical view on saving baby eagles versus saving baby humans. Obviously, his goal was just to expose that people hold that view. It wasn't really to convince them otherwise in this video. You can see how people think. If you're looking for opportunities to practice, I think the author does a great job of suggesting some opportunities, and I think I may have added one. Let me go over these. Listen to talk radio and pretend it's your job to answer their questions. This will give you a lot of material to work with. If you've listened to talk radio, you'll know immediately you can see why this would be a good practice tool, because people call in oftentimes with kind of gotcha type questions. They're trying to get people. They're trying to stump people on the air. And as the author encourages you, listen to the question and then turn the radio off and act like it's your job to answer it. How would you respond? Maybe you could pause it and you can listen to their response later. You give your response, and then you're kind of using the talk show host as the person you're bouncing your ideas off of. So that's a great way to practice. Read blogs that you know will disagree with you and use them as practice. Lots of opportunities there and different places to do that. Here's one. Watch YouTube clips of culturally or politically related Q&A sessions and use them to practice formulating your responses. There's lots of different YouTube clips of different types of speakers, conservative and liberal, taking Q&A sessions from college students. That's a great tool to listen to the question, pause it, formulate how would you handle the response, and then watch how the speaker handles it and kind of work there. And so you get practice. But as the author says, the absolute best practice is talk with people and interact with them. This is going to give you, obviously, live data. You're going to see body language. You're going to see how people respond to your line of questioning. It's going to help you in future conversations. I remember years ago playing baseball, and there was always one question I had for everybody that I talked to. There's lots of skills that you can have in baseball, but one of the skills that I had a lot of different skill sets, but one of the skills that I felt like I always needed improvement on was speed. I always wanted to be faster, quicker, those kind of things, because that speed is one of those things in baseball. It's an equalizer in so many different ways. I would always ask, like, how can I get faster? How can I get faster? And I remember I just didn't like the response, because the response was always like, run more, you know. I'd say, well, how can I get faster? And my coach would say, well, you need to run more. And I'm like, I don't like that. You know, like, give me a pill, give me a workout plan, give me drills, give me stretches, but don't tell me to run more to get faster. Like, I don't want to do that. I want something like quick and easy and without running, basically. I want to run faster without having to run too much. I didn't really like running. This is one of those situations. The best practice, and we can do all this prep behind the scenes, but the best practice is just to talk to people. Work on it, work through, stumble through. You know, it's like anybody that's ever learned a foreign language or attempted to, what is the most difficult part of breaking over the barrier and actually learning a foreign language where you can speak it and understand it? It is stumbling through speaking the foreign language when you don't know enough vocabulary and you sound foolish. That is typically the point of the foreign language learning that many people drop out of and they quit. Because they don't want to look foolish. They don't want to look like they're stumbling, so they just quit. But this is one of those things that I would encourage you. Work through it. Stumble through it. The more you practice, the better you'll get. I want to close there, but I want to read a quick section here from the book. It's on page 94, 95 in my book. It's in the section entitled Improving Your Columbo Skill. I really like this section, this little section here, because the author points out an opportunity that he missed. I mean, so here's the expert, right? I mean, he wrote the book, and he even admits here that he missed an opportunity. He realized it later, and this is what he came back to. So here's another example of an opportunity I missed. Once in a dorm lounge at Ohio State University, a student asked me about the Bible and homosexuality. When I cited some texts, he quickly dismissed them, but with this statement: people twist the Bible all the time to make it say whatever they want. I don't recall my specific response to him that evening. I do remember, though, that I was not satisfied with my answer. On the drive back to my hotel, I gave the conversation a little more thought. I realized it made little sense to argue with his comment as it stood. It was uncontroversial. People do twist Bible verses all the time. It's one of my own chief complaints. Something else was going on, though, and I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Suddenly, it dawned on me the student's point wasn't really that some people twist the Bible. His point was that I was twisting the Bible. Yet he hadn't demonstrated this. He had not shown where I'd gotten off track. Rather, he didn't like my point, so he dismissed it with a some people twist the Bible dodge. I quickly wrote out a short dialogue using questions, Columbo 1 and 2, intended to surface that problem. I also tried to anticipate his responses and how I would use them to advance my point, Columbo 3. Here's what I came up with. People twist the Bible all the time to make it say whatever they want. Well, you're right about that. It bugs me too. But your comment confuses me a little. What does it have to do with the point I just made about homosexuality? Well, you're doing the same thing. Oh, so you think I'm twisting the Bible right now? That's right. Okay, now I understand what you're getting at, but I'm still confused. Why? Because it seems to me you can't know that I'm twisting the Bible just by pointing out that other people have twisted it, can you? What do you mean? I mean that in this conversation, you're going to have to do more than simply point out that other people twist the Bible. What do you think that might be? I don't know. What? You need to show that I'm actually twisting the verses. Have you ever studied the passages I referred to? No. Then how do you know that I'm twisting them? And then he says this, which I think this is a good word of caution. He says, good word of caution here. Once you learn Columbo method, you'll realize how incapable most people are to answer for their own views. The temptation will be strong to use your tactical skill like a club. Don't give in to that urge. And then that last quote on the bottom of that page, it says, as a general rule, go out of your way to establish common ground. Whenever possible, affirm points of agreement. Take the most charitable read on the other person's motives, not the most cynical. Treat them the way you would like others to treat you if you were the one in the hot seat. And so you can see what he did there in terms of reviewing that conversation, where he goes back and And he identifies, okay, this guy is actually accusing me of twisting Bible verses, but he's doing it, making a statement generally. And again, this is one of those where you talk with people, you interact with them, and then you go back and do an autopsy, if you will, on the conversation and figure out, okay, how could I have handled that better? What could I have said differently? What question could I have asked to advance the conversation a little bit? That's where we're going to end tonight. Lord, thanks again for the evening to study. Obviously, Lord, we're learning tools. We're learning tools, and these are just methods. They're not the end-all, be-all, but Lord, if they can help us get to a place where we can share the gospel with somebody, we want to utilize them. We want to be equipped. There's nothing more important, we realize, than sharing with others what your Son accomplished on the cross 2,000 years ago, and the way that his sacrifice was accepted, the way that you raised him from the dead to create a brand new race of human beings that will never die again. We just are grateful to you and just these opportunities that we have. And each one of us, Lord, have people in our life, either people that we interact with on a very consistent basis or people that we run into from time to time, or even complete strangers, Lord, that we are able to engage in conversation. So just give us wisdom, give us open doors, and give us boldness to walk through them when you have opened them for us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good week.